Well, I started it about 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, no, another problem.
Uh,
But it's going to take a while to get enough stock in there. This particular one was, I think, yeah, an old MPD kit. It was a little bit of a monster to deal with. Quite a big hole in the bottom of it for an XO3 mortar sticking through the bottom. So it took a bit of filling in, did that, and it ended up with quite a small mortar in the firebox. I probably would roll a new boiler. This particular one was, I think, the two of these kits I've got to do. Yeah, an old MPD kit. This one was actually what they called a spare part engine. It was quite a late build for the A class. Quite a big hole. The spare part engines had quite a narrow valance on the mortar sticking through the bottom. So it took a bit of. This one's a bit of an excuse for a train, but it is actually trip 13 at Preston. So we've got my first Gibson Ginty and a couple of brake vans, engine and brake working. This one was actually what they called a. And I finally managed to get a chassis underneath it that works. Quite a late build for the steam outline has been a bit of a learning in the last few years, but. You know, I think I'm getting there, and hopefully there'll be a few trips and actually trip 13 tricks and tips as we get there. Gibson Ginty. And this is another one I quite enjoyed building this, and then it's another Gibson kit. Stand here. I finally managed to get a chassis 264. Right way around. Needs a bit of weathering. A bit of a learning in the last few years. Bit reticent about weathering them at the moment. You know, I think probably need to get a bit more practice on that, but I'll get there. Sound fitted this one, and it was one of the first few that I've started sound fitted. Most of them are heading that way as they come onto roster. So It's quite a nice little. Needs a bit of weathering, a bit of a learning in the last. And then this one. Now this is a little bit of a problem engine. I'll mention that later on. But this ended up being a Batman body, Gibson tender, because of course there are flush tender on the lens rotaries, and it's a Comet chassis with a lens rotary valve gear on it. It took a good year to build this engine, and it's something I started previously on a whim, but then I kind of got reinvigorated it when I could get the Judith Edge kit, scratch builder sort of helper bits to the kit. I started it originally with a Hornby body, but it only finished up with a Hornby boiler by the time I finished it. The Judith Edge running plate, it's a Comet chassis. There's quite a lot of bits that had to be scratch built on it, especially around that King front end, because it's one of the first two engines which were quite a lot different to the rest of the class. The Princesses, nearly everyone was different. In fact, you got the one with the Princess Victoria with the massive cast motion bracket in this area here. It was a big Y-shaped bracket. But this particular one, it's got the King front end, early Stanley coming from the Great Western. Makes it very awkward because the coupling rod is threaded through the slide bars and the motion bracket. So every time you want to get the cylinders off, you've got to take the coupling rods off and the connecting rod. So it's a bit of a piece to get apart, is this fella. But I'm quite pleased with it. And again, it's sound fitted. It manages some of my big long distance trains, the Glasgows and Eustons, so it's doing all right at the moment. So this engine, which I've brought along tonight, it's on the table behind me, was my proving ground. I thought if I could get this thing around the curves on my layout, which is 3'9", and for P4 that's pretty tight going, then I could probably manage the steam loco outlines. So we did a few bits on this one.
Yeah.
Again, it's a Hornby body. It's a Comet chassis. Various other refinements, as you'll see when we go along. Underneath, let's get through the bits and pieces here with what we've got here. Brake pipes, brake shoes, and I think the leading sandpipes have been taken off this one. I'll show you why in a moment. But you've got 2 bus bars on this. They carry sandpipes, the dummy springs, and all the rest of it. The loco is built split frame, so you've got split axles on the main drivers, and you'll see that the front truck is actually slid quite a long way over, as is the back one. Anything else I've missed? No. Move on. So that's the part of the brake gear and the leading sandpipes. And I make these clip on because I like to be able to take the engines apart. The layout has got to be reliable, so they've got to be able to stand a bit of abuse, these engines. So they've got to be able to be taken apart. So these just clip into little holes in the frames on these wire pins. And you'll also notice on here, there's copper clad underneath if you will, the hangers. And that gives you the electrical insulation from one side of the locomotive to the other. what I've found is with very tight curves like this, you run the risk of your valve gear contacting the leading sides of your wheels. So having it split frame does give you the ability to keep the number of shorts down. It seems to be working. Shorts can be a bit of a problem. I do tend to work on chasing shorts down using DC to start with. All the locos then are later fitted to DCC to run up to DCC. But for instance, being able to take the valve gear off like this, it's very easy to say, oh, well, we've got a little bit catching at the front here. It's very tight on a Duchess at the front here, up against the leading truck. So it's nice to be able to take this bit off and say, that's the source of the problem. Let's just lose a bit round here somewhere. So it does help that. Trucks, I had a lot of trouble initially getting the trucks right because the curves are very tight. If you put too much downward weight on a sprung truck, when you go into a curve, the wheels will tend to lift on one side. The axles tend to tip over because the coning angle on the wheel goes hard into the curve and it just tips the wheel. So it's getting the spring and weight downward force just right on these. So what I do is I keep the top of the truck rigid against the frames of the locomotive. So you'll see there's a machined block on the top of there. There's a pack slim block on the frames of the locomotive, which gives the insulation from the live frames. So it allows the truck to slide left and right as the locomotive's going along. And then I use what I've termed deep springing, which you'll see the truck's a lot lower there. So there's quite deep slots, probably over deep axle box slots, allowing the axles to really come up and down and really get in contact with the track. And there you can see the rubbing block, if you will, on the in between the frames there. What have we got in there? Yeah, you'll see we've got the ends of the bus bars, the main bus bars they're not actually holding the wheels in. There are actually keeper plates underneath there to hold the wheels in, but it allows you to solder all the clutter on that goes between the wheels. The little gizmo at the front here is actually the speaker. It's a little sugar cube speaker for the sound.
Yeah.
Rear truck. Again, very similar principle. I did make a cock up on this one because I did have it pivoted here, which meant that the attack angle axle was way too sharp. So of course it did tend to wander off down crossing V's when it was unprovoked. Giving it a little bit more length allowed it to go into into curves much more gracefully. Again, same idea. You can push those wheels down quite a long way, quite a deep springing action in there. It's an ordinary Comet truck with a few modifications and some thin down castings on it. So we got on here. Okay, it's ready for a bit of a clean there, but you can see on the top of it again, it's got a bearing plate to maintain a solid contact with the bearing surface on the underside of the locomotive, which I think will be on here. Yep, there it is. So we've got a turned flat surface, keeps everything solid against the frames. That's the bearing surface for the pivot, and you can see where I am.
I need to get one
before I corrected it. The locomotives, by the way, are what you would class as semi-sprung. So the front and trailing axles have got a bar above the axle box slots, for want of a better word, that allow you to set the ride height, and it's perpendicular perpendicularness to the track. The axles are sprung down, except for the trailing axle, which relies really on the weight of the motor and the gearbox to push that down into the track. The center axle, again, has got this kind of deep springing concept, so it will spring below the center line and above the center line. And it seems to work quite well. It allows you to get quite a precision levelness to the locomotive, and it keeps it on the track, which was the main thing. I tried various things to start with, and it wasn't always perfect. Okay, there's the view of the top of the loco. We've got quite a big motor in there because there's plenty of space in this fella. Motion bracket, and again, split down the center to give you electrical isolation both sides. Cylinder blocks will all come off. It does allow you to get the locomotive stripped down. And again, you've got the DCC chip and the speaker at the front there. That's a Mac. It's a Maxon, actually. It was one of our lads managed to acquire a big box full of these things. So a lad called Graham Seed. So I don't think the chap who runs High Level, Chris Gibbons, really appreciated it when he started flooding the market with these motors. But anyway, there we are. But it works quite nicely. They work quite nicely. And it's heavy, which gives a bit of weight to the back end of this loco. Again, that's another view of the motion and the gear. I suspect, it's a while since I built this fella, but I suspect this is all markets, slab bar pieces inside there. And again, all insulated, bolts on to brackets on the frames, so you can take everything apart. Oh, that one. This is probably teaching grandmother to suck eggs, but I suppose you've probably all had a go at making split frames, split axles, I should say. I use the Brassmasters, the branch lines jig. The yellow is obviously just a bit of oil in there to prevent you gluing the axle into the jig permanently. Little hole in the end. You machine a spigot on one end and you drill a hole in the other end, but then you put a little hole in here to let the air and the glue out. Otherwise, you get a pneumatic effect as you put it in the jig and the two halves start to push themselves apart. I have had a go with 2mm axles. It wasn't terribly successful initially, but I have managed to master it. I think you'll find if you look on the precursor on the table, that's actually got 2mm split axles on the tender. I tend to keep notes of things once I get to a point where something is working. And I have little drawers with all the little bits in that I've made, and then all the little dimensions so that you can make another one the same, because you know it worked last time. Because the memory's not that good, and it does help you keep track of it. So there you are. You've got an axle there with a little spigot on it. You've got the other end that you drill a hole out. I don't tend to do this arrangement for the gearbox axle. I'll show you what I do when we come to that one. The main thing is when you put it in the jig, make sure you get a meter across both ends to make sure you haven't got this face pushed up against that face, and effectively give yourself a short. Easy done. With regard to the gearbox end of business, what I do is I put the split in line with this frame bearing here, and that is actually a Paxilin bush on the gearbox axle. I've also started using machinable plastic, which is probably a better solution. Paxilin's a bit of a dirty stuff to work with, to be fair. Not particularly user friendly, as you would say. I put with this loco and some of the earlier ones, I started soldering phosphor bronze wires from the tire and going through the boss in the middle of the wheel, and then pressing the axle on. This led to some problems, should we say, getting the wheels square on the axles. Subsequently, I've started using the Bassmasters etched straps across the back of the wheel, through the axle and to the other side. That's given me another problem, but we'll come to that. There's always something, you never get a clean solution. But anyway, what the locos that are out on the layout are bedding in quite nicely. They've done quite a few operating sessions, so I'm fairly happy with what's going on. And with this particular one there, you can actually just see the sandpipes on one of those buzz bars. So trying to get the wheels on square, this is a GW quartering jig. I've actually just got a little bit of plastic card on there just to even the weight out to the wheel boss to go in the center there, because otherwise when you're pushing it on, you're pushing just right on the center of the boss, and this just evens it out a bit. Helps keep the wheel square as you close up the tool. I found this, a pretty good piece of kit, really. And you need to vary this a bit because it does depend how big the boss is in the wheel. Right, okay. I mentioned about the crab earlier, the lens rotary one. I bought this one from one of the Scale 4 group members who unfortunately had passed away from his estate, and it had been professionally built. It had been built with the frame set ever so tight against the wheels. Wouldn't go around even some of my gentle curves for love and money. So I knocked the chassis down, re-gauged them at about 14.5 mil. It was built split frames initially, so I put it all together, set this fella going, and it was like a duck. It would woggle around from side to side, side to side. Couldn't really trace what the problem was. And in the end of the day, it's down to how well the wheels and how square the wheels are sitting on the axles. It got to the point where I thought, okay, I'm really struggling with this one. After putting a new set of wheels in it, I still had the same problem. I decided I'd build a second crab, which tended to exhibit the same problem. So I thought, is this the Gibson wheels that are giving me this run around? It wasn't per se. It was down really to the fact of trying to shove a phosphor bronze wire through the wheel boss. That was what was distorting the situation. Took a while to find out, to the point where I made this little gizmo, and this measures concentricity. So you can see, you'll see on the dial gauge, you'll see as that wheel set rotates around, it moves up and down a little bit. It also measures sort of vertical run out. So you can put it on the face of the wheel, and again, you'll measure how far that's moving. So then that allows you then to analyze what's going on with these wobbly wheels. This particular, I did the jig so that it would go into the pinpoint holes on the ends of the axles, which is what we're doing here. It will also take ones that are inside bearings or flush axles, whatever you want to call it. So it'll do those, i.e. tender wheels or something like that. And it will also do pinpoint axles as well. But I've not really needed it on any of that sort of stuff. But it was the crab driving wheels which was a real problem that I needed to get to the bottom of. because it's not actually that easy to sort of to sort this out, to rectify some of these problems. I tried, particularly with, this was a set of tender wheels actually. I was having trouble getting tender wheels on nice and square. And I tried bushing and making a little wheel chuck, which is what this little guy is here. He's a little wheel chuck, so that you can turn and drill and bush the centres of the wheels. My engineering is, I think, what the Royal Engineers motto is, you know, rough engineering made easy. we try our best, but and see how we get on. But anyway, at the end of the day, I came to the conclusion that about 1/10 of a millimetre for concentricity and 2/10 of a millimetre sort of on overhang gives quite a nice, smooth running locomotive. The question was how to maintain that and get it. So this is where I started using the Brassmasters straps on the back of the wheels, which is fine if you've not got an uneven number of spokes, but you can get them on and you can get it flush without disturbing the boss, which is the main thing. It does tend to give rise to some electrical continuity problems, which is the problem that I've found with them, because the Stania 264 suffers from intermittent pickup problems, and I think it's down to that. But you know, we're getting there. I've got a couple of more problem engines to talk about. You don't always get it right, and I started this one, Brassmasters Precursor. Very handsome little engine, lovely little engine. And somebody just recently, and I can't remember who it was who said it, said they're unbuildable then. Well, I'd started it quite a long while ago, and I'd actually learnt the lesson that the central heating pipe that comes as a boiler is not a good idea, unless you're actually going to weld it. So I did roll the boiler up on it, and then everything else seemed to go fairly swimmingly. It came together quite nicely. It all comes apart just as I'd expect. Came to spray it and put it all together, and it runs like a pig. It's going along, badum, 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 you know. So now come to have a look at it, and I noticed that the wires on the back of the wheel, 2 of them have been pulled off, and of course they're catching on the frames. The frames are way out too far, right tight against the back of the wheels. So I'm going to have to strip the chassis down on this. But another thing that Brassmaster tended to do with these early kits was they made the whole front end move around like a bogie, really. So all this piece here to about there is on a pivot here. So the whole front end is like a lump of jelly, really. It's all over the damn place. So having fixed this piece in, I then adopted my standard deep springing truck on a rigid bogie mount. So that's the thing goes round the layout fine at the moment, but albeit it's a bit lurching because the wires on the back of these wheels are catching the frames all the damn time. But I'll knock the chassis down and rebuild it a millimetre or so narrower. I think that should help sort it out, I hope. Yeah, you can't, you know, you try your best. It doesn't always come true. I don't know. I seem to have chased through that fairly quickly. I'm about halfway through if you want to put the kettle on, I'll finish some of these fun locos off before we move on to some of the other stuff. Now then, this was a real old piece of work. It says Manchester Model Shop, but I could have sworn I bought this one at that place that used to be at Bolton. It's an LMY 008 class. It's actually going to be the Preston Pilot, which was actually a Wirral Railways locomotive, actually. Round top boiler, short bunker. It's coming together reasonably. It's, you know, like a challenge. Nothing like a challenge. And it's probably one of the oldest kits I've got, this one. But I did have a go. Putting a whole new chassis in it. It's a Bill Bedford chassis. He does actually give you an attempt at radial trucks on it, because to be fair, this engine from this axle on a solid set of frames right through to the axle, the truck axle at the other end, it's a very long wheelbase. So to get it round tight curves is a bit of a problem. But Bill solved this with his radial axle boxes, or so I thought. If you've ever built much of some of Bill's kits, they can be a little bit problematical. The amount of material I had to take off the bearings on this to get it to actually sort of pivot. So it'll go at an angle like that, round to an angle like this, just a little bit, but it's enough to get it round my curves, my very tight curves, and to actually get it to steer the mechanism round. I've made it so that you can take the trucks out. So there's two little screws in here and this little block at the front. That allows you to get the sort of the truck out. There's springs set above the top of here that rest on this L-shaped former that's carrying the axle. Unfortunately, Bill only etched this to the width of the inside of the frames. So of course, when the axle moves over, the spring drops down the end and straight onto the axle. So of course, immediately jams the wheels in that position. So I ended up putting a little bit of angle on the top surface of that, so that the springs will at least ride when it goes round the curve. I've put little screws in here so that I can undo the pins here to drop the thing out and get the truck out. I had to remove vast amounts of metal on the bearings around here. Now, to be fair to Bill, he obviously realised there was a problem with this, especially around the amount of metal he gives you here on the original kit. So in this version, which is actually the later version of the kit, he's actually giving you much smaller pieces of metal here. Unfortunately, he hasn't compensated for that by lowering where the bearing surfaces on this in the frames here. So of course the wheels sit high. So you win some and you lose some, but there you are. That's the fun of making models like these.
But Bill never builds anything. He never tests his own lectures.
But anyway, we've got him working now, so that's a start. So it was a bit of a laugh. But yeah, so this kit's mainly white metal. I do have, I've got two of these on the go at the moment. The other one is London Road Models have taken them on. It was one of the George Norton ones, that's right. But of course, the way he gets around it is he makes one of these one end of it a completely pivotable truck and a rigid front end, and makes it compensated, which, to be fair, on my layout, it behaved like a bag of spanners. So I've actually put another one of these chassis in, and that's where how I know the chassis build changed the chassis design slightly. But I've got them both working, and they both run, and they'll both go around my curves, which is saying something. If they'll go around my curves, they'll run on most railways, I think. And that's the engine that I'm trying to build. It was originally LMY 1041. It went to the Wirral Railway as Wirral Railway's number 6. It was allocated LMS number 10638, but became in its own number series 6762. So that's the loco I'm trying to build, and I think I'll probably have a reasonable job at it by the time I've finished. These things are never easy, are they? But there we are. Anyway, moving on to some more fun. Right, Jadenko. They've not always got a good name. There we are. I read a review of this one just recently. I've got to bear in mind that when I started collecting these, we didn't have the quality of models that have come along subsequently, and these were all yeah. But I'm reasonably pleased with it so far. I started it a long time ago, and it went into the odds and sods, bits and bobs drawer for a long time, like quite a few of my locos did. It's taken quite a while to get the knack of being able to sort of put them together and getting them to run. This one's probably going to take a bit more work, but it's coming. It's on the bench at the moment. There's a few errors with it. I've got rid of the bulk of them, but I think it's coming together quite nicely now. Actually, to be fair, it's on the bench behind us here. If you want to have a close look at it, underneath, it's my standard way of doing things these days. It's split frame, mainly to avoid complications of the tight radius curves that I run down to 3'9", which is quite tight for P4, to stop things like valve gear catching rims or wheels and stuff like that, more than necessarily a pickup issue, which I tend to get with P4. I tend to have, as I mentioned earlier, a semi-rigid arrangement where I'll lock the rear axle down and the leading axle. I'll set the heights on those with screws in the horn blocks, so they stay. They are pushed down, so they will go into a dip. This one has the weight of the motor on it, so it will drop into a dip if there's a dip, to keep the wheel in contact with the rail. Center axles sprung on the axle boxes both sides, but that will spring above the center line of the rigid axles, if you will. So it will hold the track. They do hold the track fairly well. Keeps all the wheels in contact. I think what you would term it is probably semi-sprung, I would guess. The bogie is on a solid base on the frames. The deep springing is actually in the chuck axles. In this case, you can probably just about make out the springs are on a clip over the bolster, and then they press down on the axles at the back. This is on this particular one here, I've got like a sleeve over the chuck axles, which limits the side play within the bogie frame, so they stay in the right place relative to the sides of the frame. There is a big, long, sort of oblong shaped slide in the truck to allow the truck to negotiate my severe curves, like say 3'9". So they do tend to stay on the track, so I'm quite pleased with that. It does take quite a few years to get to the bottom of that one. But I think the next slide I'm about to go into is starting on other things rather than locomotives. So I think I've kind of covered the locomotives to a point there. If anybody's got any questions about locos, I'll happily try to answer them. They do. I have managed to master them going around my tight curves and pulling my trains fairly well.
Have you sort of standardised on high level gearboxes and Gibson wheels? Max on motors.
Yeah, whatever. Well, motors have been a bit of a laugh of late, haven't they? Because I used to use the Mashimas, but of course you can't get them anymore. A new supplier of those, yeah. Whatever will go into high level gearboxes, I'm quite happy to use. I tend to use the gearboxes that have the screw on the primary gear, because it's so easy then just to let that off while you're fiddling, rolling things up and down, make sure you've nothing binding and the rest of the bobbins. Shorts can always be a bit of a problem on the radiuses I have, particularly associated clutter. So you can see on this one here, you'll see the insulated frame block at that end. It's actually standing off the body slightly on very thin double-sided copper clad, actually, just to lift it off the local body, give it a bit of clearance to prevent any shorts across the frames. These big brackets across here will hold the dummy springs, brake gear, whatever else clutter goes underneath it, all the odds and sods. This front end is a bit like one of them little dolls that you take bits out of, because once you pop the wires, the axles are held in by little bits of tube with wires in. So you slide a little bit of wire out, the axles will pop out, then the spring block will pop out, and then underneath there is a screw that takes the truck off. And then when you take the truck off, underneath there is another screw that takes the cylinder block out. So it's things stacked one on top of another. So, but touch wood, the principle I'm using does seem to work. It keeps everything insulated, everything running well, and you can get it apart. I have to be able to get these things apart. Fortunately, touch wood, once they finish the commissioning, they do seem to stay running. So it's a good thing. Because I never paint them before I put them together. I probably should, but I don't. So I'm having to take them all apart, to paint all the bits and pieces, to put them all back together again. And if I can do that and they still work when I do that, then I'm fairly happy. I've got things back together in the right order. Yeah, we're getting there slowly. It's one of them things that takes. It's a learning for me, because I really only started on the steam outline locos only a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago probably. I hadn't had much success with them before that. My layout had diesels and electrics on it for quite a long time while I got the track work sorted out, because of course it's a big layout. There's over 200 turnouts on it, and that's just turnouts, not counting the slips, diamonds and the rest of it. So it's taken a while to sort of get the terrors out of that lot. And I'm gradually now getting into the period that I wanted to do, which was always in the 1938, which is the LMS period, the peak of the LMS period, really. So are we ready for a drink? We're ready for a drink.
We're always ready for a drink.
And we'll have another go in a minute.
Very good.
Springs above the
No, it's I keep it that piece there, that line there, is a piece of flat phosphor bronze.
Oh, that's the spring, right? Yeah.
I don't use little bits of things if I can avoid it. Get big bits of things. And then they'll stand, and it's actually bearing on the turned bit at the back of the axle. It's not actually rubbing on the axle. I've had problems with the leading trucks because I use phosphor bronze wire, and you can probably, on this one I've actually used phosphor bronze strip, but it's bearing directly on the axle. So the Duchess that I showed you earlier, when I stripped that down to paint the chassis, it had almost worn through had a spell early on in lockdown doing fish vans. You normally don't expect to need that many, but I have 2 trains worth of these, so they soon add up. But believe it or not, that particular one there is a Judenko one. In fact, there's 2 of them. Yeah, there's some old ones in there.
I think we've got a couple in the cupboard here.
What, kits are finished?
No, not finished.
So, yeah, there we are. Yes, that looks a bit better. Yeah, so I've got there's a couple of Judenko ones in there. There's the northeastern one, which I'm not quite sure how that managed to work its way in there. This is a very limited edition malloid kit. I've subsequently corrected the curled up roof. Yeah, and I think this was a Cambrian. So we've got in there, yeah, D1885 Cambrian, the 1884 Judenko, which is the slatted van, and then of course the West Coast joint stock malloid models diagram 107. They've come together quite nicely, and they're a bit grubby looking, so they're not too bad. They run on the little fish train that I've got. And then at the time I did the presentation I mentioned to you, I was still working on these, but of course they're now actually all on the mostly finished. I think there's only the L and Y ones, which is this one, and this one. There's 3. They're still waiting lettering. I haven't got round to lettering them yet. Nickel silver roofs generally clipped in, unless you've got a parkside kit where you can use the plastic parkside ones here. So yeah, so we've got the a couple of variants of the L and Y one. Talking to Noel Coates, not that many of these fellows actually made it through in a decent condition to the LMS period. They got eradicated quite quickly. I think they had a lot of trouble with rot down in these frame members, but quite a lot of them had the vents on the door boarded up. So yeah, they'll make a nice addition to the particularly to the Manchester fish train that I've got that comes in. Yeah, this is the Foremost 1982. It's more or less a standard LMS van, all white metal, fairly straightforward. Nothing too special apart from, like I say, I've put a nickel silver roof on it. Again, relatively easy to do. That's the Parkside, which was originally down as a diagram 2059, which was a bit late for my layout. So I added the extra vents on the end to turn it into a diagram 1886, and it's fractionally wide for that diagram, but it's in service. It's doing the job. But yeah, so they're not too bad. And of course, coaches. I had a spell on coaches. I seem to have done nothing but build full brakes for years, what seems like years. But anyway, that's what comes of having your layout timetable from 1 o'clock in the morning, because that's when all the LMS full brakes came out. But anyway, so I had the 2 non-corridor coaches, which are on the table behind me. They again, it's these little whims you have, you know, when you're building up the layout. Oh, I could do to make some coaches, and you start them, and then they go in a cupboard and they disappear in that cupboard for years and years and years. Anyway, eventually they've surfaced now, and they're finished, and they're actually on the layout. So this one, the corridor coach, is a corridor brake compo, which was in one of the particular train formations I needed. And again, that's on the layout, that's finished now. So we're making a little bit of progress with some of these. I managed to get these early coaches had a Fowler guards ducket, which had rounded corners, which is not the same as what Comet sell. And the only person I knew that did them was Errol Sermon, and he cast me. I got him to cast me a bag load. So I'm now okay for the early period gorge ducats, and of course the early ones tended to have a little light on the top. And again, like I say, some of these coaches are on here. What I've been trying to achieve with them is a glossy finish to the coach side, because they did have a glossy finish. If you blast everything with matte paint, it looks too matte and too flat. And you'll notice the difference on here. I've got the full brake is in the full matte livery on the table, and the non-corridor coaches have got a slight shimmer to them, which is not too difficult to do with a sort of a satiny varnish once you've got the glazing and the weathering and all the rest of the bits done. But on a panelled coach, I really struggled because I could not get a nice flat finish on it. So what I ended up doing, and you'll probably see this maybe on the next. Oh yeah, these are the. I'll come back to the finish in a moment. But these are a couple of what would started off, I guess, as L&Y full brakes. They were built as ambulance trains for the First World War, and then ultimately converted into full brakes afterwards. So they're really just into the LMS period, rather than the L&Y period. But they're more or less an L&Y vehicle. The underframe, everything below it's all Newton Heath. But again, there's one of these on the table here if you want to look at it in a bit more. But what I was trying to say about the finish was I sprayed this one with the satin finish, and I got a little bit of orange peel on it, for want of a better term. Not particularly good at painting things, to be fair, but I found this acrylic polish. And having sprayed this thing with a sort of semi-gloss finish, I use this acrylic polish to polish it down. And if you look at the vehicle behind me that's on the table there, you'll realise it's actually come up really nicely. It's nice and flat, and just a nice bit of shine. So on the layout, it looks quite pleasing, because the matte does look a bit too matte sometimes. Very, very easy to do. The previous slide, by the way, were, like I say, L&Y 56 foot 1714 diagonal. Keep forgetting about this. I haven't gone to using your roofs, Ralph, I'm afraid. I'm still using the metal roofs. And this is, you can see on this one how I fix them on with two big studs through the body of the vehicle down into the floor. I kind of got to grips with this, and seems to work. So once I've got it working, I tend to stick with it. It's but it says on the bench, but this is actually in service. Actually, it's on the timetable now. It was a 50-foot stowage van that was detached at Preston, and it was built for that purpose. So very appropriate for my layout, I'm afraid. You can see in there how I've done the bogies on this one. These particular bogies are MJT, but I modify the MJT to get rid of the press stud that he provides with them. I put a sort of reinforced rod through here and a great dollop of solder on it to hold it all together, and on the inside of this clip. So the torsion beam is on this side and on that side, which allows me to get a nut in the middle and remove the bogies fairly easily. And what I do, I leave the ears on one bogie so that the bogie can rock fore and aft. And then I turn a bush underneath this one to a little, hemisphere to allow this bogie to rotate this way and that way. So it's got full rotation on that. And I've got a lot of vehicles done like this, and they stick to the track fairly well. So I'm quite happy with that. We'll put up with that. Corridor connectors. I wanted to try and get some corridor connectors on these. I've ultimately gone for the Keen system because I can actually get them to touch. And the reason we get them to touch is because I've got them very closely coupled. But these plates here are sprung. Now, the two coaches that are on the table behind me have got this in, so you can have a look at it closer if you want later. But yeah, I managed to get them so that they close up. There's about 1 millimetre between the buffer faces when they're hitched up. And obviously these are two standard O&B out the box job easier. And so I'm quite pleased with the way this has worked. It means that there's not daylight where the corridor connectors should be, and have a lot of corridor connecting coaches on this layout. So that's really how they start. So the Keen system, you've basically got a printed, 3D printed sort of piece that sits onto the coach, effectively part of the bellows. It mimics the bellows, and then you've got a sprung plate that goes in through that. And I think we've got a better picture of it. There we are. I tend to cut these little bits off because I fear they'll probably start catching things. And what you've got is a little washer here that sort of holds the plate in here and allows it to pivot and spring in multiple planes. So that's the sort of arrangement you get when you've got a piece that fixes to your coach, and a piece that sort of plugs into the end. Comes to a little hole. You do have to make quite a big hole here to stop the washer from interfering with any of the coach side chunks. But apart from that, that's really all you have to do. On a Hornby coach, you just run a 10mm hole through the end, take it out with a big broach, and Bob's your uncle, it's done. Once you take the Hornby one off. And there's a unit made up. You can see the washer in the back here, and the sort of mock, in this case, scissor connector. It does do a version with the suspended ears for the LMS suspended gangways. He also does a version for the coronation sets, which were again slightly different. So I'm quite pleased with them. I'm quite happy with them. I quite like those. And there you can see how much they'll spring in and out.
Done with a spring, or you done with foam?
A single spring,
Right.
in the centre.
Does that come with the kit?
Yeah. So it's all there. The little spring's actually held in place by this washer, and it sits under here. So it will pivot that way, and it'll pivot, if you will, side to side, sort of that way. So they do slide quite nicely. If you want to have a closer look, you can, like I say, there's a pair of them hitched up on here with that in mind. So, having put the corridor connectors on, you then come to couple them. Now, if you ever try putting a 3-link coupling across underneath a corridor connector, forget it. It ain't worth it. So I had to do a big investigation how to do it. I wanted to keep the couplings close coupled, so I desperately need to have sprung buffers, because these go right in, as you can see on here, when they're on the curves. They're pulled right in. But I needed a coupling that would work on my curves, and that you could just literally bang together. And I tried several different things to start with. I experimented with the links, Dinghams, AJs, The Dinghams worked the best for what I wanted, but they wouldn't work on these curves. They just would not cope. The loop on the ear, I'd have to make every loop a bit bigger. And I thought, that's going to be a pain, isn't it? I then got your Dave Booth book, the Alex Jackson, the Man and the Coupling. And after reading through that a few times and having a look, there was a version that a guy called Vincent DeBow used, called the Altered Alex Jackson. Now, I did catch up with Tony Williams down at Scale Forum and tell him I was going down this route. So I don't know whether he's took me off tonight and not turned up, but he did actually drop me a mail to say he was going on holiday. So I did warn him I was going to come out with this tonight, so I didn't want to upset him too much. But the Altered Alex Jackson, I was really pleased with. There's a couple of things put me off the Alex Jackson in its original form. On coaches, you tend to put the coupling on the bogey, which to me is the wrong place for the forces involved. You know, I appreciate it's been done and I appreciate people have got it working fine, but to me it just didn't seem quite right. And also when you put it on wagons, you're putting it on the opposite ends of the wagons. So so I looked at Vincent DeBow's idea, and it's still an Alex Jackson. It's an Alex Jackson, but it's upside down. But that's because he's using 1/8 thou wire. So you get the strength bit in the bottom of the coupling. The 11th thou wire is fine, but on curves like this, what I found was, particularly if you put it onto the floor of the vehicle, the coupling would rook up. It would tend to spring upwards. So maybe that's just my cock-handedness, but there we are. But anyway, I have got these working. You can see the coupling is just about visible in the middle there, the corridor connectors. And you can get them to about 1 millimetre gap between the buffers when the corridor connectors are in. The way I do it is to effectively put the coupling under tension all the time. So it's set back further than it perhaps would normally be. I'll come to uncoupling shortly. But the idea being it keeps the coupling under tension. So I've not had any major problems with trains separating. And I've been really pleased with it. Being 1/8 thou as well, it copes with the bends, the curves on my layout, more flexible. And surprisingly, it's not as easy as you might damage. It's pretty resilient, really. So, you know, it's more or less the same way of doing it, but again, it's 8 gauge wire, 1/8 thou wire. I've got a little jig for bending the bits and pieces. And again, copied off Tony's ideas. I've got my sketches with all the little notes on all the way around about getting it in the right place and getting them all set up. And I've also got your jig, Ralph, that I've altered slightly here to feed the hook in, so that I can put a nice right angle bend on at a particular distance back. And if I get a nice right angle bend on, I can just solder it into that piece of angle that's on that little bit of plate, which means that the orientation of the coupling is taken care of. So you can put it on wagons. I've got it on some wagons. Most of my fish vans have got them on. So again, you can see the little fella here. Fairly innocuous thing. And you can get the sort of little plates that are holding the couplings tucked in under the axle, so the forces are at least in line with the axle. It also lines up against the buffer beam. Now, okay, buffer beams aren't always the bottom of the buffer beam anyway, isn't always at the same place on all vehicles. But on a lot of standard LMS stock, it's not too bad. Sometimes you've got to put a little knuckle in where it's outboard of the buffer beam, but you can usually get away with it fairly well. So I'm quite pleased with these. I've got about 85 vehicles fitted with these now, so it's stood the test of time. On a Hornby, it's fairly straightforward. Looks a bit odd there because although this is actually level, doesn't look it on that photograph, but there is an angle down to the plate that sits underneath the buffer. This is a fairly standard conversion for a Hornby coach. I take all the self-centering bobbins out off the Hornby coach, put a couple of screws in here to set the ride height and keep the bogie level. Because surprisingly, once you take that coupling piece out, the Hornby coaches have a tendency to wobble. So this, I'd only do it at one end of the coach, but I put these two screws in here just to rub on the top of the bogie frame and keep the coach sitting level and still. And then obviously the little plates that I met with the couplings on, all you've got to do is set the distance from here, which I do with a little spot of glue. Check it against the gauge, which I'll come to in a minute. And if it's in the right place, feed a bit more glue around the plate. Not too difficult to set up. You can see it probably better there. You can see that one's not been covered in paint. But again, it's just a little plate, a bit of angle, coupling on, bent at 90 degrees at the end, using Ralph's Palatine jig, and just soldered in. The coupling orientation's right, the buffer beam set in the height right. Just got to put it center, and it keeps it all fairly simple. I can only cope with simple stuff. And again, this is I think we've got these are MJT bogies on here, and you can see the little dished or domed bolster on that end of the coach to allow the bogie to rock in two planes. This one's rocking on the ears at this end. So there's 3-point suspension between there, and there. Keep the coach nice and steady. So setting the distance, you've got to get the plates on the coaches in the right place so that I can get this jig in, which is just the right thickness to allow the coaches to go around my tight curves on the ends of the layout. If I can get that in, then the buffers will compress enough for it to go around without dragging the train off. And that's how I set the distance. If I've got it wrong, because I use one master coach with the plate set correctly, when I'm building a new coach and I'm putting a new coupling plate on, I'll put a tiny dab of glue on, stick the plate on, make sure this is in the right place. If not, I can break the glue off, move it forward and back, and then just put a bit more glue on to hold it. I've not had any of them drop off. Bit of super glue on a flat surface sticks them fine. If you really need to get them off after that, then you need to put a bit of heat on and it will just break the glue down. And that's just a double check that the ride height is set right, whether you need to bend it up or down. But generally, I'm going off LMS standard stock, bottom of the buffer beam to set the buffer height, and it works with a lot of vehicles, not everything, but a lot of vehicles. I made a little uncoupling hook which threads in under the buffer beam here, goes on the sort of downward facing hook, pulls the coupling down, and then they'll separate. You sometimes have to pull the coaches together to compress them to get the hooks to sync. I'm looking at ways of automatically doing that. Unfortunately, I haven't got it built into the presentation tonight, but I did do some work on that last couple of days. So I'm, something there. Just dismiss that. So that's basically how these work. I'm finding them on the whole quite good. They're quite tough. They'll take a derailment without pulling apart or anything like that. So I'm well on with them. They're not too difficult to make. I've made a few jigs to help me with them. Have we missed anything on these?
I can ask a question. In the times that I've seen you late, when it was before you had the 9038 stuff on it, all, to my best of my recollection, all the coaches were KDs.
They were, correct.
Right? Now, there must be a good reason why you've dropped, we could just fire to a package sticking on, as opposed to going to actual the maker. There must be a good reason for switching them.
Well, a KD is a great knuckle coupling.
Yeah.
And I didn't particularly want a great big knuckle coupling. I wanted something that looked a little bit more authentic, and I didn't have corridor connectors on the modern image stuff. Yeah. I'm trying to get a little bit of refinement in since the modern image period, to be fair. Admit. Okay. So what have we got now? Right, so auto couplings. I'm working on this as we speak. At the moment, it's all purely manual at the minute. We have to squeeze the coaches together, put a little hook in, and pull one of them down. Usually the one sort of to the left as you're looking at the coach. Coupling up is fine generally. You've got, like all X-Jacksons, they've got to be fairly close. They will slide over themselves unless they're on a curve. Pitch up. Uncoupling, what I'm planning to do is I've got some drawings that I brought with me. For those that are here, you can have a look at those. But basically to use a little servo motor to push the coupling forward and down from inside the vehicle. As most of the coupling's done generally, either in a full brake or a brake end, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. And I'm looking at doing that via infrared control. Could do it with DCC, but then you've got to start looking for loco numbers. Whereas if you use infrared, you can point it at the vehicle and get to it. So that's still ongoing. We will get there, I'm sure, one day. Right, on the bench, 6-wheel vehicles. These can be a bit of a laugh at times. There's a couple of these on the table here. In fact, it's probably these two, to be fair. The 6-wheel fish van that I showed you when we first started on this section, I finally managed to solve the problem of these. I have Mazakit's standard sprung axles on these two. I don't know if I've got an inside view of these actually. The one thing to watch, particularly with non-passenger coaching stock, is these wheels are 3'6", not 3 foot, as in a normal freight van. So consequently, they are quite tight against the floor of the vehicle, or can be, which can cause you a nice short against the metal floor of a vehicle. In fact, I'll have a look. Yeah, there we are. So basically what I do, underneath the spring here, there's a tiny little block of styrene, just to stop the spring grounding out and the flange of the wheel hitting the floor of the vehicle. The center axle is, again, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to think whose it is actually, can't remember. Might be Michael Clark, but they're pivoted on the inside, they're bearing on the inside, which allows this axle to move left and right. And it's very lightly sprung. You can perhaps just see there's a 5-thou wire there. Well, very lightly sprung. But it springs deeper than the outer two, and it goes down deeper, which is why there's a little packing piece under these fellas. So, and it does seem to work. I'm quite pleased with the way this has worked. I know there are various ways of doing this. You've got this Clemenson chassis that will sort of allow this piece to spring in the middle. But when you've got a lot of clutter on, like you have with the stove R, it's very difficult to mount all that clutter that's hanging underneath the vehicle on a chassis where this middle piece is moving. So I decided to sort of reinvent the wheel, so to speak, again, like I have a habit of doing. But there we are. So that's that one. What have we got now? Okay, another fairly big project I started. I think I can't remember when I actually started this. Most of it was completed during the lockdown. Was this big building, my big warehouse. It's 3D printed. I got York, what's it called, York Model Makers to do it. It's laser cut, yeah.
Not 3D printed.
Sorry, laser cut, yes, okay. Sorry. I was going to buy a laser cutter, but decided that it's too expensive and I've not really got enough use for it. I would prefer 3D printing, which is what I've actually done for the girders there. Those girders are 3D printed. That was my Christmas present this year. But the building, it's a multifaceted building. It's a bit of a pig. It was a bit of a pig to draw and put together. But I got your model making to laser burn this lot. Or what's the name? Lynn Lightburn or something. quite a name. And I'm quite pleased with it, really. It's about 4 foot. It's a good 4 foot long. It's not very tall, but there's quite a lot of bricks on it. I've only just cardboard mocked up the roof because it's quite a complicated shape. Let's just move it on a bit. I get a good view of it. It's quite a size. It's made mainly out of I think 3 milli MDF, and then uses 0.75 row mark for the windows, little windows with 0.8 acrylic, because there's lots of these little opening windows in it. It's full of these little things here. I managed to get some transfers made to after a lot of scale in one of these printable transfer sheets. All the lettering. This was all quite new in my period, so it's quite bright compared to the rest of the building. The building's weathered down now. I'm reasonably happy with that. It's a good size, this building, so it's get the right. You get more of an idea of it when you see it all together. So there's quite a bit. The building was an original North Union building up to there. That's why there's a different sort of window arrangement at that end. But it's a good size of building. So, but I'm quite pleased with that. So there is a bit of scenery appearing on the layout in places. I've recently taken on to a bit of 3D printing, which I've done the girders for. I am struggling somewhat with the CAD on this. It's a bit of a laugh, but I'm getting there. I'm sure I'll get there in the end. You're never quite sure, you know. Believe it or not, there's rivets all the way along here, and then you'll be looking at it, and they're all going out. All these rivets are going out, and then suddenly you've got one that goes in. Because for some stupid reason you've put the number in and got the rivet dished rather than bumped. But you know, that's the fun of the game, I suppose. 2D drawing I don't have much of a problem with, but the 3D stuff is proving to be a bit of a laugh. but I've actually just been doing some bits for a Dalek, of all things, and they'll be going to be printed tomorrow. So we'll see how they come out. So, but certainly, I think I'm going to find a lot more use for 3D printing. I'm using 3D printing to do the couplings that I mentioned, because I'm hoping I can use sort of combinations of movement and ramps to actually push the coupling out and dip it down to get it to work. So and drive that off a sort of small, well, I suppose you'd call it a servo motor, but a linear servo motor rather than a conventional one. And if I can pick the power up off the track, get a little pick in there, I can get it to work. So I think we're more or less reached the end of that. I'm happy to answer any questions and maybe show some details of anything. If there's any questions, anybody would like to?
You seem to enjoy setting yourself a challenge, don't you?
Well, there's always a bit of fun in it, isn't
No,
there?
of course
Yeah.
it is. As long as you enjoy it, that's the main thing.
Yeah. So, because I think when I've been in the past, I've always tended to talk about track work, to be fair. But I'm hoping I'm over the bulk of the track work problem now. And all the electronics and the block instruments and all the other clutter, the signal box interlocking and all the other bobbins that are on there. But well, I'm sure as the lads that came to the layout found it, it's good fun to operate. But I'm trying to take it further into the sort of detailing and fine scaling and getting a bit more scenic now. And I'm getting there. Yeah, it's like all these things. Another 500 years and we might be there.
I'm curious, let's go with that blue Duchess. Have you got a full blue Coronation Scott set as well?
I do.
Yes.
I did. I put an order into Hatton's for all the vehicles.
Yeah.
And then they came back with, you could have about half of them. But I got straight on to that firm in Leeds, is it? No, so it's the lady's name. Olivia.
Olivia's train.
Yeah, and I managed to get the ones that were missing. I've got the full set. They're just waiting conversion to P4. So it should make a nice set, but unfortunately, it's not in the timetable that I'm working at the moment because I'm doing 1 o'clock in the morning down to about 4 o'clock. Well, it could run late, or it could be a test run, I think, in the middle of the night. So yeah, so we might well do that at some point. Yep. What, a full set? Yeah. Well, I've got them. They're as good as the rest. They seem to be as good as the rest of the Hornbys. Again, they're quite fragile on the underframe. You know, if you're a bit rough with them underneath, and it's very easy, surprisingly, when you're prizing bogies off and altering them to start to break the tie bars on the bogies when you're taking the wheel sets out. But the one thing with the Hornby bogies, on most of them, not all of them, on most of them, the P4 wheel set will just go in and they just run. You don't need to put any compensation beams in or anything. They'll just run. The bogies with the step boards on seem to be molded slightly wider. So some of them, not all of them, but some of them do give a loose axle. So you will get odd ones of those that derail. Quite what's happened there, I don't know whether it's a different plastic. Don't know. But yes, I've got quite a lot of the Hornby coaches, probably more than I really need. But yeah. But the beauty of it is it enabled me to get some sets up. They might not be correctly formed, but I've got sets up that can work trains, and I can get.
Very attractive thing down this one.
Sorry?
I say they look very attractive thing on this one.
Yeah, yeah.
The art ones and stuff, don't
I think I'm going to try this business of polishing them up as well, because they are quite matte. They need the roof stoning down because they're bright silver, just as they've come out of the factory, but they've got a matte as if they've been in service for for 12 months on the paint job. So either one or the other, to be fair. So yeah, need a bit of work on them. But what stock? There's not much stock, to be fair, that you can take out of the box and put a set of P4 wheels in, and they just fly around the layout.
Where's acrylic polish? You get that from an art shop or a
Uh,
car shop?
no, it's actually, well, I bought it on eBay, and it was just acrylic polish.
So it's actually a polish rather
It's like teacup. It's like teacup. Yeah, but I would say it's probably finer grain. It's white rather than that yellowy colour. It does seem to be slightly waxy, but you can see the finish it does on there.
Yeah.
It's taking the sort of orange peely finish off the vehicle. Problem with, obviously, you can't use that on panel vehicles because so you've got to use a lacquer. The lacquer tends to be just that little bit too shiny, so look at matting it down. But to be fair, I've not been looking at getting the level of finish on too many coaches of late because it's only something that's occurred to me fairly recently, really. I was just giving them a good blast of matte paint and putting them on layout and thought, they don't look right. You know, so all these things, you do it, you learn, and you look at a way of making it better and coming back at it.
The rail match varnishes, which you probably won't see, or something went down into small quantities, the rail match polyurethane, but I found even using the varnish frame thinners, you put satin through the airbrush, it comes out matte. So what I generally tend to do is mix gloss and satin.
Yeah.
Like 50-50 or 75-25. I've got a tender side spray with a different mix on either side with the sticker on that saying what it is, and because you use the gloss is far too glossy on it. And as I say, use the matte straight out of the to come out too matte, but blending the two together seems to be a
satisfactory solution. Yeah, because the matte, particularly with LMS coach maroon, does tend to make it go somewhat pinky looking as well.
I'm sure the varnishes are available, as I say, on the video. You just tend to find something that works and stick with it.
Yeah, yeah. But certainly with steel vehicles, I think polishing them might be a part of the way forward, because it'll give them a bit of variation along the coach side as well. Could be it's going to be a bit of a pain in the neck to do, but we have a hobby like this to take on. So.
Okay.
But yeah, so I don't know whether anybody any further questions.
Probably think of them on the way home.
But yeah, come and have a look at these by all means, and that's the you see something.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Norris. It's been most fascinating. And I've asked the members now to show our appreciation in the usual manner.
Okay, thank you.